In the case of Antonia Bara, what began as a holiday turned into a horrific experience. Without a doubt, alcohol, especially when consumed in large amounts, wreaks havoc on both body and mind. More critically, individuals in a state of heavy intoxication become extremely vulnerable, easily falling prey to robbers, fraudsters, rapists, and murderers. This vulnerability is particularly acute for women. The worst part is that perpetrators often attempt to justify their actions by claiming intoxication or blaming the victim. Survivors of such violence frequently choose to remain silent, dealing with their pain and trauma alone. Some manage to move forward, while for others the weight becomes unbearable. The tragic story of Antonia Bara, a young woman from Chile, exemplifies the devastating consequences of silence and societal condemnation, illustrating how a man who shattered the lives of many young women could evade justice. The case of Antonia Bara sent shockwaves through the entire country, sparking public outrage and leading to mass protests. This incident set a precedent for reforming the flawed criminal justice system that previously allowed rapists to justify their actions. The widespread reaction helped ensure that a dangerous criminal was permanently removed from the streets, thereby protecting other potential victims. What is known about Antonia Bara? Antonia Maria Bara was born on December 3, 1999, in Temuco, the administrative center of the district bearing the same name in Chile. She was the youngest of 5 children in a relatively affluent family, with her parents Alejandro and Marcela Bara. Antonia grew up with 2 older brothers, Sebastian and Ignacio, as well as 2 sisters, Catalina and Carla. She had the closest and most trusting relationship with Catalina, whom she considered her best friend and confidant. Their parents invested in their children's education and overall development. They participated in sports and music, and after finishing school, they enrolled in prestigious colleges. Being the youngest, Antonia was especially cherished and pampered by her parents. Despite this, she excelled in her studies and aspired to enter the tourism industry and travel the world. In 2015, at the age of 15, Antonia met a boy named Martin Pardines on social media. He lived in the same city, not far from her home. Martin was 8 years older than Antonia and, at the time they met, he was already divorced and had a child. Little is known about his early life. Born in February 1992 in Temuco, he was the second of 3 children in the family of Yvonne Pardines and Paula Divoire. When he was 20, a girl from his school became pregnant by him, and to avoid scandal and potential consequences, he married her. However, the marriage dissolved shortly after the child's birth. Based on their social media interactions, Martin and Antonia knew each other personally and communicated between 2015 and 2017, maintaining only a friendship. After graduating from school and starting university, Antonia moved to another city, and their communication ceased. She studied the travel industry, made new friends, discovered new hobbies, and no longer thought about Martin. Antonia returned to her hometown only for vacations and holidays, but she stayed in constant touch with her parents, brothers, and sisters. At university, she became close friends with Consuela Uribe, and they were nearly inseparable. She also began dating a fellow student named Rodrigo Aguado, and their relationship lasted about a year. However, in September 2019, at the start of the new semester, they had a fight and decided to take a break. Feeling upset after the breakup, Antonia sought a way to unwind and distract herself from her heavy thoughts. With the Chilean national holiday approaching, she looked forward to the long weekend and the numerous events she could attend. Antonia and her best friend decided to attend an electronic music festival in the picturesque town of Pucón. They drove there in Consuela's car, along with 3 other university friends. In Pucón, they stayed at a summer house owned by close friends of the Bara family. The owners were out of town but had kindly offered the house to Antonia and her friend, letting them know where to find the spare key. Upon arriving, their companions went their own way, and the 2 friends settled into the large, cozy house, planning to spend the whole weekend there. On the evening of September 18th, while walking around the town, Antonia unexpectedly ran into Martin, and they talked. It turned out that Martin had also come to the festival with his friends, and they were staying in a large rented house a couple of miles from the city center. They had a pleasant chat and agreed to meet the next day at a party in one of the popular nightclubs. During a phone conversation, Antonia informed her parents about her plans, and her father strictly instructed her to be cautious with alcohol and to behave prudently. Antonia laughed it off and assured him that everything would be fine. The next day, the friends spent several hours preparing for the party, choosing outfits and doing their makeup before heading to the club. Before leaving, they were excited and ready for a fun night out. They drank a bottle of wine they had brought with them before taking a taxi to the club. Upon arrival, the girls ordered a bottle of champagne at the bar, which they shared before hitting the dance floor. It was well past midnight when Martin and his friends showed up at the club and found Antonia, who was already quite intoxicated. Despite their inebriation, they continued to drink and dance. According to Consuela, she tried to persuade her friend to stop drinking, but Antonia didn't heed her advice. At one point, they lost sight of Antonia and began searching for her. They found her half an hour later in another room with Martin. By then, Antonia was so intoxicated that she could barely stand. Consuela enlisted the help of their classmate and Benjamin Morales to take Antonia home. However, Antonia began to resist, insisting that she wouldn't leave because the night was still young. After a few minutes, she started feeling ill, prompting her friends to take her outside for some fresh air. Despite this, Antonia insisted on returning to the club. As the night wore on, Consuela approached Antonia again, expressing her exhaustion and desire to go home. She suggested they leave together. However, Antonia insisted on staying at the club and continuing to have fun. After Consuela left the club, realizing there was little hope of convincing Antonia to leave, she hailed a taxi and headed home, going straight to bed upon arrival. Meanwhile, the party took a dark turn. Around 6 in the morning, Benjamin witnessed Martin leading Antonia out of the club, holding her tightly as she swayed from side to side. Benjamin noticed Antonia seemed disoriented, and Martin took advantage of her vulnerable state. They lingered near the entrance for a while as Antonia felt sick, waiting for her to recover slightly. Soon, Martin's friends approached and suggested they continue the party at their rented house. Despite being sick, Antonia and Martin opted to walk, barely comprehending what was happening around them. Their walk was captured by surveillance cameras, revealing Martin leading a visibly intoxicated Antonia, who struggled to free herself from his embrace. Along the way, they passed by a 24-hour supermarket where Martin decided to purchase beer. The store was deserted, and at one point, he attempted to kiss Antonia, but she pushed him away and turned aside, clearly uncomfortable. Despite her discomfort, Antonia was unable to leave or resist. Martin's dominance prevailed, and he continued leading her. By around 8 in the morning, the couple reached the rented house. The others in the living room noticed that Antonia appeared distressed, but due to her heavy intoxication, she was unable to articulate her protests. Martin persisted in hugging her and attempting to kiss her. Since all the other friends were also heavily intoxicated, no one attempted to intervene. Shortly after, the couple retreated to one of the bedrooms where Martin assaulted the dazed and confused Antonia. Despite her attempts to resist and pleas for him to stop, Martin disregarded her requests. After the assault, Martin returned to the living room with his friends and resumed partying, while Antonia remained in the bedroom. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, she called Benjamin and begged him to take her home. However, due to her intoxicated state, Benjamin struggled to understand her pleas. The girl's speech was slurred, and she was constantly sobbing, unable to clearly explain what was happening or where she was. Concerned, Benjamin reached out to Consuela and informed her of the situation, suggesting that Antonia was in trouble and needed help. Consuela received the call from Benjamin and, despite the difficulty in understanding Antonia's location, managed to piece together where she was. She immediately rushed to her friend's aid. Upon arriving, Consuela confronted Martin, demanding to know what he had done. Martin simply smirked and claimed that everything was consensual. In one of the rooms, Consuela found her friend in a horrified state. Antonia was crying and pleading to be taken away from there as soon as possible. The sight of her friend in such distress only fueled Consuela's determination to get Antonia to safety. A few minutes later, they arrived home, where Antonia immediately took a shower. Despite Consuela's urging not to wash away the evidence and to call the police immediately, Antonia insisted that no one should ever find out about what happened. Later that afternoon, Antonia called her parents, trying her best to hide any signs that something was wrong. The next morning, she and her friends drove back to the student dormitory, where Antonia was consumed by depression, bullying, and a desperate desire to move on. She wanted to forget the nightmare that had befallen her and attempted to carry on with life as before. She continued attending classes and conversing with friends, but only Consuela could discern her true state of mind. She refused to discuss what had happened with anyone and adamantly rejected the idea of filing a police report, fearing that it would expose her ordeal to everyone. Nevertheless, rumors began to spread rapidly, embellished with intimate details created by gossipers behind Antonia's back. People whispered, pointed, and laughed, making her feel increasingly isolated. One particularly cruel incident occurred when a fellow student openly confronted her in front of others, probing into the truth of the rumors. The final blow came when Antonia received a call from her ex-boyfriend Rodrigo, whom she still harbored feelings for and hoped to reconcile with. In a heart-wrenching phone call, Aguado recounted all the vicious rumors that had reached him and declared that he no longer wished to see Antonia, severing any chance of reconciliation. Despite Antonia's tearful attempts to justify herself and explain that what happened was assault, Aguado cruelly dismissed her, hurling insults and accusations before abruptly ending the call. This conversation dealt Antonia a devastating blow from which she felt she could never recover. On Saturday, October 12, 2019, Antonia sought solace at her parents' house, yearning for the comfort of family. Though her relatives noticed the sadness etched in her eyes, Antonia stubbornly insisted that everything was fine. That evening, she posted several childhood pictures on her social media profile, accompanied by a poignant and despairing message. The day after a family dinner, Antonia retreated to her room on the third floor of the house and remained there. About an hour later, her sister Catalina, with whom she had always shared a close bond, checked in on her. Antonia expressed her desire to sleep after turning off the light, asking to be left alone. Catalina respected her sister's wishes and left the room, expressing her love before departing. A couple of hours later, their mother Marcela approached Antonia's room to inform her that dinner was ready. The woman knocked on the door repeatedly, but there was no response. She entered the room, assuming Antonia was asleep. However, upon touching her hand, she realized that Antonia was lifeless. Marcela screamed, prompting everyone in the house to rush to the room. An ambulance was called immediately, and attempts to resuscitate Antonia were made before the arrival of medical professionals. Tragically, their efforts were in vain. Antonia had taken her own life by consuming a lethal dose of sleeping pills. The news sent shockwaves through the community, as many were unaware of the deep emotional turmoil Antonia was experiencing. Her family and friends were devastated and immediately sought justice for her. The Bara parents initiated discussions with their daughter's friends and classmates to unravel the events leading to her death. They were appalled by the rumors and gossip circulating about Antonia, shedding light on the toxic environment she had been subjected to. Consuela stepped forward to provide insight into the events, sharing all she knew. However, the parents felt that more needed to be done. They made the decision to enlist the services of the city's top private detective to help reconstruct the sequence of events and gather evidence to bring the perpetrator to justice. Additionally, Alejandro resolved to make the case public. Leveraging his connections, he organized a press conference where he addressed dozens of cameras, revealing that his daughter had been violently assaulted and bullied to the point of taking her own life, and that the perpetrator remained at large. The detective's investigation yielded valuable results. He successfully pieced together the chronology of the fateful night and obtained testimonies from several witnesses willing to testify in court, including Consuela, Benjamin, and a couple of other students from their university. After compiling all the gathered information, the Bara family pursued legal action, urging the court to arrest and punish Martin for his actions. However, law enforcement deemed the evidence insufficient to warrant Martin's arrest. Martin maintained that the encounter had been consensual, albeit acknowledging their inebriation. Furthermore, Antonia had not reported the incident to the police. Martin remained free, and soon he and his family countersued the Bara family, accusing them of defamation, harassment, and the unauthorized disclosure of personal data and information. They alleged that the Bara family had slandered Martin and tarnished his honor and reputation. In response to these accusations, the Bara family decided to hold a press conference to defend themselves publicly. They asserted that Martin was the perpetrator, not the victim, and that their daughter had been the one whose honor and reputation had been destroyed. The legal battle intensified as both sides sought to vindicate their perspectives in the court of public opinion. Martin and his family accused the Bara family of publicly disclosing their home address, phone numbers, and social media profiles, which allegedly led to them receiving insults and anonymous death threats on a daily basis. They emphasized that Martin's guilt had not been proven and claimed that everything had happened by mutual consent. His family members declared their readiness to defend his case in court. To the Bara family's surprise, the police sided with Martin and his family after the statement, prompting Antonia's relatives to refrain from making negative comments about them and sharing their personal data. This sudden change in allegiance dealt a significant blow to the Bara family. Despite this setback, they remained steadfast in their pursuit of justice. As Antonia's case garnered widespread public attention, within a month, 8 more girls came forward to the police, alleging that they too had been victims of harassment and violence by Martin. They had remained silent out of fear of condemnation and censure, highlighting the pervasive culture of victim blaming and the reluctance of survivors to speak out. As more victims came forward, including one who was only 13 years old at the time of the assault, Martin was finally taken into custody in June 2020. He was arrested and sent to Mukau City Prison on suspicion of assaults committed between 2011 and 2019. However, less than a month later, Martin's lawyer managed to secure his release on his own recognizance for the duration of the investigation. Furthermore, a number of lawsuits filed by the injured girls were rejected due to the statute of limitations on the crimes. This meant that there was a high probability that they would not be considered or taken into account. Out of the 8 appeals, the court only registered 2 cases, further complicating the pursuit of justice for Martin's victims. The release of Martin from custody and the rejection of the victims' claims sparked widespread public outrage. Thousands of people took to the streets in protests and rallies across the country, demanding justice. In response to the public outcry, the prosecutor's office initiated a review of the case and called for a change in Martin's measure of restraint, urging for him to be taken back into custody. Concurrently, the statute of limitations was lifted for all cases of violence committed by Martin. The trial commenced, and in February 2021, Martin's messages on social networks were made public. In these messages, he boasted of his actions to his friends, further incriminating himself. It was revealed that Martin had kept the underwear of his numerous victims at home, treating them as trophies in a disturbing collection. Among the items found were underwear belonging to victims who had previously appealed to the court, including an item belonging to Antonia. Martin was subsequently charged with 9 crimes against sexual integrity, with 3 of his victims being under the age of 18. In response to these developments, the Bara family once again appealed to the public, urging them not to remain silent about violence and to work towards bringing those responsible to justice. On December 29th, the Supreme Court ordered a new trial in Martin's case. In March 2023, his case was transferred to public defense. Once again, he pleaded not guilty, attributing everything that happened with Antonia to the large amount of alcohol they consumed together. However, on July 7, 2023, Martin was once again found guilty. His previous 20-year sentence was reduced to 17 years, accounting for the 3 years he had already spent in prison. This meant he had 14 years left to serve. Antonia's family expressed their dissatisfaction with this decision in an official press release issued by her father. It was emphasized that no punishment could ever bring back their daughter and sister to them. During the legal proceedings, Antonia Bara's family, along with other victims affected by Martin's actions, reached out to public figures to advocate for women's rights. They collaborated to amend the criminal code, particularly the sections pertaining to sexual offenses. Their objective was to safeguard the rights of victims of harassment and sexual violence. The initiative was named the Antonia Bara Law and proposed the elimination of limitations for crimes of an intimate nature, as well as an augmentation in the sentence for a perpetrator if a victim took their own life after the assault.